History books usually portray kings seated on magnificent thrones, clad in armor, ruling from glittering palace halls. They speak of conquests, diplomatic marriages, and the sacred continuity of royal bloodlines. What they rarely mention is the darkness behind those thrones. For centuries, a silent reality grew inside European courts, passed from one generation to the next, quietly spreading until it weakened even the mightiest empires. That reality was incest. This is not a story about morality. It is a story about power. To avoid losing the throne, to keep lands undivided, to preserve what they called pure blood, kings married their sisters, uncles wed their nieces, and cousins reproduced with one another again and again. This closed cycle did not only create distorted faces, it produced sick bodies, mentally impaired heirs, and eventually, the collapse of dynasties. This video is not gossip. It is a genetic autopsy of European monarchies. In the Middle Ages and early modern period, the greatest fear of any king was losing power, losing territory to rival houses, strengthening competing nobles, losing the support of the church. All of these fears merged into a single obsession: blood. Royal blood was believed to be special, divinely chosen. Marrying outside the family, especially to commoners, was seen as degrading. Marriage was never about love, it was about lineage. As options narrowed, marriage within the family became inevitable. For a king, marrying his sister was safer than marrying a foreign princess. With a sister, land, power, and secrets stayed inside the family. The church officially forbade such unions, but when it came to kings, the rules bent. In theory, the Catholic Church defined incest as a grave sin. In practice, things worked very differently. Kings applied to the papacy for special dispensations, and more often than not, those permissions were quietly granted. For the Pope, losing the support of a powerful monarch was a far greater risk than bending a moral rule. Thus, uncle-niece marriages, first cousin unions, and even sibling marriages were treated as exceptions. As these exceptions multiplied, the genetic cost grew heavier. If you want to see the physical imprint of incest on the human body, you only need to look at the Habsburg dynasty. Europe's most powerful family also became the clearest example of genetic collapse. For centuries, the Habsburgs married almost exclusively within their own family. The result was a physical trait so distinct it entered medical literature: the Habsburg jaw. This was not merely a cosmetic issue. It came with speech disorders, chewing difficulties, breathing problems, and severe facial deformities. And that was only the visible part. King Charles II of Spain was the peak of this genetic disaster. So many close relative marriages existed in his lineage that, genetically, he was almost the clone of his own grandfather. Charles could barely walk. He struggled to speak. He never learned to read or write. His mental development remained at the level of a child. He suffered constant illnesses, seizures, and he was infertile. Yet for years, he was kept on the throne of one of the largest empires on earth. Because the problem was not Charles. The problem was the fear of an empty throne. With his death, the Spanish Habsburg line ended, and Europe plunged into the bloody war of succession. At first glance, this question seems aesthetic. In reality, the answer is biological. Incest destroys genetic diversity. The same defective genes combine again and again. The result: deformities, weakened immune systems, cognitive disabilities. If you carefully examine European royal portraits, you will notice the same face repeating across centuries. The same jaw, the same lifeless stare, the same asymmetry. These were not coincidences. They were the screams of a closed genetic pool. What sounds shocking today was once almost routine. Uncle-niece marriages were considered acceptable because they kept blood close enough without provoking the outrage of full sibling marriages. Genetically, however, the difference was minimal. Children born from these unions had high rates of disability. Palace physicians concealed the truth, presenting illnesses as God's trials. Princes and princesses born ill were hidden from the public. They grew up behind palace walls, often never married, or were announced to have died early from natural causes. In reality, they were the silent victims of genetic decay. Some could not walk, some could not speak, some never reached adolescence. But these deaths were never linked to incest, because admitting it would shatter the legitimacy of the dynasty. Women paid the heaviest price in this system. When queens gave birth to sick children, they were blamed. Yet the architects of the genetic disaster were men. If a queen failed to produce an heir, she was labeled infertile, while the same king continued marrying his cousins. Women endured repeated pregnancies, miscarriages, stillbirths, and lifelong trauma, none of which found a place in official history. This is not an individual story. Incest reshaped Europe's political map. Weak rulers, unstable governments, internal chaos, succession wars, and ultimately, the extinction of royal houses. The Habsburgs are the clearest example, but not the only one. The Bourbons, the Romanovs, the Wittelsbachs. The same cycle appeared again and again. Why is this scandal missing from school textbooks? Because history is usually written by winners, and by those made to appear legitimate. The truth of incest destroys the image of kings as God's chosen representatives on earth. So it was silenced. Paintings were retouched. Diseases were hidden. Portraits were idealized. But the body does not lie. European palaces were covered in gold, but they were rotting from within. Incest was the invisible engine of that decay. In trying to protect their thrones, kings ultimately destroyed their own bloodlines. This video is not sensationalism. It is the exposure of one of history's greatest cover-ups. And it leaves us with one final question. Were kings truly chosen by God, or were they merely the heirs of a genetic catastrophe? This story doesn't end here. Royal incest shaped more dynasties than you think. If you want the rest of what history tried to hide, subscribe, because this is only the beginning.